Hello, everybody. We are so excited to host another installment of our career conversation series here at Fairygodboss, presented by our friends at Accenture. Hello, everybody. I'm going to be introing you all in just a moment. Before I do so, I just want to say that my name is Dan, Dan Sprock. I am our Director of People and Culture here at Fairygodboss. If you ask me what I do here, it will probably depend on the day, the time of day, because I could be wearing my continuous feedback hat. I could be wearing my soundboard hat. I could be wearing our recruiting hat. So yeah, when you work here at Fairygodboss, you definitely are very, very multifaceted. But yeah, essentially, I'm kind of our biggest cheerleader. And I think that today's conversation is going to be hugely, hugely impactful, one that I'm very, very excited about. We're essentially going to be talking about balancing your career and supporting your mental health. It's really fitting that today is May 25th because May is Mental Health Awareness Month. And I think it would be probably the understatement of the year, or the last decade rather, to say that the last 18 months has not taken a rather serious and noteworthy toll on us all and our mental health. So yeah, I mean, for me, I would just like to open up by saying I find this conversation hugely encouraging, hugely important as somebody who's not only in this space, in the HR, people and culture space, but somebody who himself has had lifelong struggles with major depressive disorder, anxiety. The fact that I'm just here right now and can say those things out loud is definitely a kind of progress. I think still a long way to go, but yeah, I think that's, for me personally, I think that's why this conversation is going to be really, really impactful today. So yeah, with that said, I'll stop hogging all of the air. I would love to hear from each one of our panelists. Go ahead and briefly introduce yourselves, share a bit about what brought you here today. Maybe let's get started with Marina. Maybe we'll start with you.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much, Dan.
Yeah.
I'm so glad we're here, and thank you for sharing your own experience. I think that's so important. So my name is Marina Kadekel. I am the head of content development at Thrive Global. Thrive is a startup founded by Ariel Huffington 4 years ago to help end the stress and burnout epidemic worldwide and unlock people's full potential. And so we usually work with Fortune 100 companies to help their leaders and their people take small actionable steps to improve their mental health, their prioritization, their focus, and so on and so forth. And I head up the content studio, so we work with partners, brand partners, to create all sorts of great content, videos, articles, audio, everything else to help people do just that. And Thrive also has an enterprise app that helps people form sustainable, better habits through small steps called Microsteps, which we can talk about a little bit more later. And we've been working a lot with Accenture, and Ariel and I will get into that a little bit more on our Thriving Mind program and more. And I am honored and thrilled to be here with you guys.
Well, we are all super excited to have you as well. You mentioned Ariel, so why don't we just go to Ariel next? Yeah, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Hi, Ariel. Nice to meet you all. I by day hack stuff. Yeah, not why we're here, obviously. By not day, by voluntary efforts, I help lead Accenture's U.S. Mental Health Ally Program. So essentially, I started at Accenture almost 5 years ago, and there were a group of us under a disability ERG employee resource group that volunteered our time to learn how to refer others to resources and have difficult conversations. And we took that one step further and realized the stigma of having it associated as a disability was really limiting. So we've taken this and we've expanded it and I mean, exploded in terms of the interest and impact, because everybody has mental health. And that's why I'm so happy to be here today to, pay it forward from my own experiences and, inspired, Dan, by you. I have been diagnosed with OCD, major depressive disorder, generalized anxiety disorder. And my truest understanding of why I was meant to go through these lowest of lows was to come out, better help others, better empathize with others, and pay it forward. So I'm just so grateful to be here today to do exactly that and talk a little bit about my experiences at Accenture, helping to have these difficult conversations.
Yeah, I very much appreciate the openness and the honesty. Yeah, thinking back, it's like, were we in this place 10 years ago? Not nearly as comfortable as we are today. So yeah, all very encouraging signs. Sabrina, let's kick it over to you.
Yes, thank you. Hello, everyone. I am Sabrina Dobbins, and I'm the founder of Project Passport. It's funny because before the pandemic, we were a travel retreat experience. We wanted people to go to chase their problems, to manage their problems. I didn't want to take people away from their problems when we traveled because many people do that to escape them. I didn't want that. So I wanted to create a company that brought about a sacred space for people to take off their mask and for people to really be able to take control of their lives. Well, the pandemic hit and everything changed, and we ended up having to pivot very quickly because we were supposed to go to Kenya, and before you knew it, everything was quarantined. And so now I run virtual retreats and experiences for companies and women in order to provide them tangible tools to take control of their mental health and well-being. I'm really big about experiential wellness. I think that oftentimes people think that we have to ascribe to one modality. We have to just do yoga or just meditate or just go to counseling. But what if you could do a little bit of everything? What if everyone has their own special concoction? That is what I believe in. And so the work I do combines all kinds of modalities together to help people take control and really just get rid of those masks. And so that's what I'm doing right now. They're primarily virtually through Project Passport, but we are hoping to return with the world and hug and physically see people soon.
Yeah. A special concoction of wellness. I love that. But yeah, because you're so right. It's not necessarily being honed in on one thing to be therapeutic for you. It can be a total, I think you use the word modality. Yeah, love that. That's pretty amazing. So real quick, everyone, like before I'm going to open it up to questions amongst our panel in just a little bit, but I do also, and if you're following in the chat, you can see, but yeah, this is just, I wanted to be very open and honest that, we are going to be talking about mental health issues. You've already heard the words anxiety and depression. So again, suffice to say that these things can be triggering. So I want to reiterate for everybody that we're looking to create a very open and safe space here. But however, if you are somebody who is in crisis, if you're somebody who is struggling emotionally, we are going to be providing resources throughout the chat. In fact, our first message at 12:01 gave everybody access to the crisis text line, the suicide prevention hotline. So please, there is absolutely no shame in taking advantage of these resources. Please do so if this is applicable for you. With all that said, I think it would be remiss if we did not mention, because it is very much related to today's topic of conversation, that today marks 1 year since the murder of George Floyd. As I know all of our panelists are aware, and I'm sure most, if not all of our participants are aware of as well. Given the major impact that this has had on this country, and especially on people of color in this country, I think that it would be very, very important for us to share, and I'm about to right now in the chat, a robust and kind of expansive grouping of anti-racism resources that can help give people access to, if you are looking to contribute to really upending racial inequality, systemic racism, police brutality, this array of resources that we'll be sharing with you all. We initially shared this here at Fairygodboss with our people about a year ago. But they range from things including literature and media to consume, organizations to follow, volunteer, and donate to. So yeah, I just want to give everybody in the chat access to those materials if you so wish to take advantage of them. But yeah, I mean, I would love to hear some perspective. I know Sabrina, you had some thoughts that I'm sure that we would all really appreciate hearing about what today means and the impact that it has had.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dan. I mean, bottom line, being a Black woman, the impact has been immense on me as a business owner and even how I interact with myself and my team. I have brothers, I have Black males in my life. And I think that as people, we start to forget that before employee, before leader, before anything, we are human beings. And I think that we need to give ourselves grace and give ourselves that empathy and understanding that we may not be okay today, and to own that process. we may not be okay tomorrow, and to own that process and to be okay with the fact that you are just not okay with what's happening around you. There are times that I feel like completely shutting down, but I have to remember, what is my why? Why am I doing the work I do? What is my mission? And so I really challenge everyone today, as we think about this experience, this horrible thing that's happened, that's awoken the world in such a strong and immense way. I hope that you can dig into yourself and remember what's your why and what you have to bring to this earth and what you contribute, because everybody has a role and everybody has a place here, and we all can be a part of the change collectively. And so with that being said, I hate that we have to celebrate this type of anniversary, but it's also been, I think, the catalyst for something really beautiful that's going to happen in our society. And I really do I want us to remember that this should not be in vain. There needs to be initiative that we all take to be a part of that change, and to own the fact that this has affected our mental health in many ways, no matter what color or creed you're from.
Yeah. Know your why. I absolutely love that sentiment, that statement, that outlook. And also, just I really deeply appreciate you sharing your perspective on what George Floyd's murder has meant. Looking back 1 year, you're right. It's calling it an anniversary is a very, very weird thing, and it's an incredibly somber day. But I really do appreciate it. I think I speak for many people here, if not all of us, that we really appreciate your perspective on this, Sabrina. And opening it up to today's discussion around mental health, I think that when we look back over the last, I know I had already brought this up, like a decade ago, could we have had this conversation? I think that when we think back several years ago, I don't think mental health was something that we discussed as openly as we do in the workplace, or really in really all facets of life, right? But here we are, we're all here, we're having this conversation. Media's covering it, famous celebrities are blogging about it. And when we look, it's obviously COVID has, very, very much, coincided with this. So why do we think, I'd be curious to hear from you all, like, why do we think a global pandemic, it took a global pandemic for us to begin having, to talk about this quote unquote silent crisis in mental health? And especially for those of us who may have responsibility as things like caregivers, which oftentimes invites neglecting our own well-being, unfortunately. So yeah, I would love to hear some perspective on this. Ariel, why don't we start with you?
Sure, thank you. I think when we take a look back at what this pandemic has done to us, everyone is grieving something. Everyone is grieving the way of life that we were living, the loss of a loved one. I mean, it ranges. And for the first time, people are experiencing the feeling of anxiety, the feeling of uncertainty and fear. So the fact that there's this mass transition to these strong feelings, I think has really unified people. But then you also added on, the caregiving aspect. I'm a single mom to twins. Before the pandemic, lots of hats that I've had to wear. So now you add on to it and you start thinking, okay, well, if my kids spike a fever, we have to stay home for 48 hours, and start thinking about how sustainable is this? I mean, really taking a step back and looking at my purpose, Sabrina, to your point, my why. It really created this sort of intrinsic reflection as we see these huge populations of people getting sick, dying, suffering. It caused this reflection to step back and say, how am I doing? Is this really what I want to be doing? And as we paused as a society and allowed that breath of awareness, I think a lot of people were unfortunately surprised to say, I'm not doing very hot. I'm not doing well right now. So that kind of takes us to that next step of, all right, well, what are we going to do about it? So I'd like to, pass it off to Dan, back to whoever you want to speak next. But I think it's a mass awareness that's kind of sparked this.
Yeah, I love what you said about like that sort of like influx of like, we're all doing a lot of moral inventory now and self-reflecting on where exactly we're at. Yeah, I think that's definitely been, has definitely been a catalyst for helping drive this dialogue. Marina, would love to hear from you.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything Ariel said. The pandemic has been a sort of a catalyst for us, right? I mean, I just want to put out there, even before the pandemic, even before anyone had heard of COVID-19, we were already in the middle of a mental health crisis. Worldwide, over 260 million people were struggling with depression. Nearly 50 million Americans experience some form of mental illness. But the pandemic really moved that issue to the front burner on a mass scale. We were all going through something together, and it was something hard. The loss of loved ones, the loss of jobs and financial stability, long periods of isolation, loneliness, this boundaryless work that a lot of us experienced when we worked from home. We called it the productivity paradox. We were working more hours, we were logged on longer, but we were getting less done and more stressed out about it. Everyone had something that was troubling them. And, the Google search for how to get my brain to focus skyrocketed during the pandemic. That's not an accident. We were all in this sort of like collective fog, but also it was a catalyst for us to think about how we were living before, what was working for us, what wasn't working for us, like the habits that we don't want to go back to that weren't serving us anymore, what we want to give up. To Sabria's point, like what is our why? That changed for a lot of people during the pandemic. And really, in terms of companies too, everyone's had to make drastic changes to our lives to stop the spread of the virus, but we need to take urgent steps to safeguard our mental health too. And that is coming into sharp relief for both individuals and hopefully companies, how we can better support, all of us. It's interesting because it's fueling this major shift as well-being as a strategy. It's not a benefit, but it's a strategy. It's not a nice to have, it's a must have. And I think that shift is really important from thinking about mental well-being as something kind of fluffy, which a lot of people still did and a lot of companies still did, to something non-negotiable.
Yeah. That word fluffy, I really like. Yeah, totally. Right. Because, mental health, it's its own entirely separate thing from physical health, right? No, it's health, right? Like your mental health is as valid as a cold that you might have that keeps you out from work. Absolutely. And that word came up again, catalyst, right? Yeah. And it's not just people. I know that many of us have shared our own struggles with various types of mental health issues, myself included. But yeah, before COVID, it was there. But yeah, that word catalyst. Yes, I definitely think that we saw an enormous influx, and it's why the conversation is it long overdue? Yes, but to look at it from the glass half full approach, we are here and we are having that conversation in more impactful ways, I think. So yeah, and to kind of like focus in on COVID in particular. Obviously, everybody has felt it hard, especially women. And I think that actually there was a study from the University of Chicago Medicine I know that we all took a look at where researchers found, quote, alarmingly high rates of mental health problems, including depression and anxiety at the outset of the pandemic. And it went even one step further, which I thought was a very alarming, but unfortunately not a terribly surprising statistic, that 1 in 6 women screened positive for symptoms of post-traumatic stress. Which is at a very consistently similar pace and rate to individuals who have seen and gone through significant disasters. So to open it up to everybody with that kind of like backdrop, how do we think, we mentioned, Marina, I know you had mentioned like what companies can be doing. So like, how can companies help support their people who are actually navigating mental health problems? Sabrina, why don't we turn it over to you?
Yeah, when I think of women, look at Ariel. She talked about raising twins and as a single mother, like she's carrying so many roles. Not only has she has to show up in the workplace, she has to show up for her children, she has to show up for her loved ones in whatever way that she can. It's not easy. And I think that women, we have created this idea that we're supposed to have it all figured out. We have to have every box checked, be the perfect mother, the perfect aunt, the perfect sister, the perfect professional. And it's not, one thing I always tell people, I've taught people, I've changed this whole idea of balance. I don't even believe that there's a such thing as balance. I believe that we need to treat our lives as a pendulum. And I believe that companies need to see women's lives and all their staff's life as a pendulum. Sometimes your life is going to swing very heavy into work and you're going to work your butt off and you are going to provide amazing results. But sometimes your life may swing into family. One example is right before the pandemic hit, my brother had a psychotic break and it was traumatic for our family, to say the least. My parents were completely not sure what to do. They were in freak out mode. They couldn't even function. So I had to step in to be there to support my brother throughout that process and advocate for him in a system that is fundamentally broken. That's a whole other thing. The mental health system is fundamentally broken. And I had to talk to doctors and advocate for him to get into a facility and all these different things. And it took away from my work. I wasn't really able to show up as a leader, except I let the team know, hey, I'm going to be into this place to focus on my family. Here are the things I can do, but I'm going to have people cover for me. And so I think if we get real in companies and own the fact that everybody can't be everything at every time, especially women, that could be a first step. And I think it's really important that teams create sacred spaces for women. You know, it's a very unique experience that we go through. And I think that there's a camaraderie, there's an experience that women can really heal each other when they have that space created for them. And I think that companies are really needing to do more. They need to do more of that. So those are the two things: creating space and allowing there to be a pendulum swing.
Yeah. Well, one, thank you so much for just sharing that incredibly personal insight, and also I really love the idea of this pendulum, like, because yeah, sometimes you can't. We talk about work-life balance. Work-life balance has been a buzzword for a long time, right? But balance, well, sometimes I can't. Sometimes we can't balance things. Sometimes one completely overtakes the other, and there's really no shame in that. It's natural. It's also inevitable. Yeah, not to run off on too much of my own tangent. Ariel, any thoughts from your end?
Absolutely. I think, you know, I echo all the sentiments that have been said. Personally despise the terminology work-life balance, but again, tirade for a different day. It's really empowering people to work how they best work. I feel so long we've been putting people into boxes. You know, we work 9 to 5, we do take the hour-long lunch break, and how that might work for some doesn't work for others. You know, just think, everyone on the call, think, are you a morning or a night person? So why wouldn't you cater your schedule to that? And same for me, right? Like as a parent, I have a hard 5 o'clock stop, and I make that very well known, to go pick up my kids from daycare and have family dinners. And that's a value to me. But what's made it easy to do that is to have a culture where it's okay to speak up and set those boundaries. So I think it depends on where the organization is at. It would require different change to be enacted, but fundamentally the culture of being able to, first off, allow people to identify how they best work and what their needs are. But then second, once those are identified, express them and allow them to be expected or accepted, where it's okay to take mental health days. It's okay to take 3-hour lunches as long as you get the work done. And that's what the focus needs to come down to. And I like, Marina, what you were talking about, where productivity is not a number of hours you work. And starting to redefine, what does success look like? Is success burning ourselves out? Is success getting a 40-hour workday in? Or is success, you know, the product we're delivering, the value we're delivering, the lives we're changing? So shifting away from the mindset of, you know, financial income is success, and start empowering our people to have their well-being be success, is the foundation of what companies need to start moving to, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love, well, one, I love that we're all having these conversations, and when one of us is talking, everybody else is just like nodding their head, just because it sounds like we're all just kind of getting it, so to speak, in a certain sense. But yeah, Ariel, I really liked what you said, you know, with regards to, like, you know, companies needing to be, you know, holding themselves account, like knowing where they are as a company, and then kind of taking it from there, right? The four of us, like, we are, I hope I'm not speaking out of turn for everybody, but I would like to think that we're all kind of like big mental health ambassadors for our respective companies. And I think the fact that, like, this dialogue and these questions, it starts there. It starts there, and initiatives and specific companies that you know, that varying depending on where you are from a growth phase, you know, finances, all that stuff, it's going to help determine how you can actually really accommodate your workforce to maybe move away from balance, and actually, to Sabrina's analogy that I'm going to steal now, the pendulum, which I think it really kind of all starts from that dialogue. Another big word that we've heard a lot over the last 18 months, burnout. There have been a lot of articles that have discussed that burnout amongst workers significantly on the rise. There was an article in the New Yorker that we all took a look at. There was a 2020 study that said 3 out of 4 US workers are experiencing burnout. It's almost everybody. So what would be your advice, and we'll turn it over to Marina, what would be your advice on how workers can protect themselves from burnout? Is there anything that companies can specifically do that can do to support workers who may be experiencing burnout? And if you have any personal recommendations on how you yourself avoid burnout, yeah, I think I'm all ears on any recommendations.
Yeah, absolutely. I love what Ariel was saying. It is a mindset shift that we have to make, both at the company level and also at the individual level. You know, we launched Thrive 4 years ago with the mission of ending the stress and burnout epidemic. All we do is steep ourselves in the science of this. And, you know, it is a buzzword. The World Health Organization officially acknowledged burnout as a disease in 2019, you know, saying chronic workplace stress that has not been successfully managed is burnout. The symptoms are, you know, feeling depleted, exhausted, negativity, cynicism, and reduced efficiency, basically. Like you're working hard, but you're not getting as much done. So I think we've all sort of felt twinges of that, if not the full thing. Like you said, 3 out of 4, that's huge. I mean, this is not something to be taken lightly anymore. And in terms of that mindset shift, you know, we have been all steeped in this collective delusion that burnout is the price that we have to pay for success, right? Like we hear it all the time. We hear about hustle culture. It's toxic, you know, and actually the science tells us that it's not true. Investing in our well-being and our mental health is what makes people more, you know, productive at work and more engaged at work, and all of those things that companies want. Driving people to burn the candle at both ends is not going to help. And actually, there's a growing mountain of science behind that. It's not even a question anymore. So, you know, companies have an opportunity now, especially after the pandemic, to, you know, address this burnout crisis by getting in front of it. You know, we have a once in a generation opportunity to redefine how we work. And to Ariel's point, that flexibility, figuring out how different people work best. It's not a one size fits all thing. You know, leaders need to role model moments of unplugging and recharging. It's really about creating this cultural permission. When your boss is on vacation, you need to see that they're unplugged and not answering their emails constantly, because that sets the tone for the rest of the team and the organization. We call it, you know, putting your own oxygen mask on first. You know, you cannot be of service to anyone else or your job if you're not taking care of your own mental and physical well-being. None of us are superheroes. You know, we need to take care of ourselves to make sure that we're ultimately having the best impact on people around us. And, you know, small things companies can do. At Thrive, part of our onboarding process is called the entry interview. We hear about exit interviews, but this is an entry interview where your boss asks you what's important to you outside of work. Often that conversation doesn't get done until weeks or months into someone's tenure. But, you know, what's a non-negotiable? Do you have an appointment at 7 o'clock or 5 o'clock every Tuesday? Like Ariel said, do you want, you know, like, is it really important to you to go be with your kids at a certain time? That stuff, like setting those boundaries and learning those things about each other immediately helps us, A, see people as a whole human rather than just like an employee or a cog in the wheel, and B, gets us to understand each other on a deeper level. A lot of companies are expanding their well-being programs, which is amazing. And then, you know, when we return to this hybrid workplace that everyone talks about, time in the office should really be spent fostering connection and interaction and team building, instead of trying to simply recreate what we had before the pandemic, because people are not going to go back to the way they were. And then in terms of individuals, Dan, Thrive's core pillar is something called Microsteps. And these are small science-backed actions or mindset shifts that we can take immediately to build healthy habits that really improve our well-being. Especially now, everyone's exhausted. The idea of a big life overhaul is laughable. Like nobody has the energy to do that. We're all tired, but luckily the science tells us we don't need to turn our lives upside down to see change. We can take little steps. You know, stress is unavoidable, but how we react to stress is something that we can control. So, you know, a great micro step that I'm just going to list a few that actually changed how I approach my day. Setting a news cutoff time at the end of the day. You know, being informed is great, but setting healthy limits to our news and social media consumption can help our brains sort of like start turning off, right? Taking 1-minute breaks during the day. People think, oh my gosh, I have to take a huge vacation, and many of us could use a vacation, don't get me wrong, but 60-second breaks to just breathe can be really, really impactful, more than people actually think. Taking 60-second breaks to breathe or go out in nature, walk around the block even. Something I do, which is a joy trigger for me that helps me sort of decompress and come back into the day recharged a little bit is, we're talking about animals before we started this, and Sabrina has a degree in animal science or studied animal science, but I look at the live cams at certain zoos, like San Diego Zoo has a really great live animal cam. So I look at like elephants or like cute koalas, and it just takes you out of your day and your zone and opens up that, you know, wonder and awe and joy, so you can come back. And then I think my absolute favorite micro step, and again, this is very micro, is not checking your phone for 1 minute after you wake up in the morning. I was doing that. I noticed I was feeling like a palpable anxiety spike that took hours to go away. Like my heart was racing. And I know I didn't like how I felt when I did it. So I challenged myself to use that 1 minute before when I woke up and I checked my phone to drink a glass of water, take a few deep breaths, or set my own intention for the day. And I really noticed that my anxiety was going down. Of course, I fell off the wagon a few times. I cheated, but that's okay. Microsteps are no judgment zone. You can just get back on. It took a few weeks to establish that as a habit. But when I did, I realized why it was so bad that I was doing that. And it was because when we start our day on our phones, we're starting it focused on what other people want from us, right? If you're looking at your emails or your texts, like what is your boss? What do people want from you? Or what inspires other people if you're scrolling through Instagram or social media, rather than what inspires yourself and what you want to get from your day. So just that 1 minute to set your intention actually really changed my life. I go into my days differently. I treat people, you know, with more empathy, and I'm much less anxious. So I think that was a long-winded answer to say it's something both companies and individuals can do, and it can start smaller than you think.
I not a long-winded. I could listen for another 10 minutes easy. All these micro steps, it's like you're in my head. Yeah, absolutely. Yes, no phone for that first minute, or perhaps even like 5 minutes for myself at the beginning of the day.
I'm only at 1 minute so far, no judging, but I'm aiming to get compassionate with ourselves. That's another one.
And the concept of an entry interview, awesome, right? Sets the tone. First impression that whoever it is that you're like, you know, going to be reporting into directly, you know, they really kind of are one of the most important people in your lives. You're talking to them probably every day, at least every week in most occupations, right? And yeah, setting that tone from the very beginning that you are seen as a person with passions, with needs, with it makes you feel invested. So yeah, love the concept of both an entry interview and micro steps. Really, really awesome suggestions. All right, so let's move along a bit. So, you know, when we think about really most things at work, right? Intersectionality plays an enormous role in employee well-being. There can be multiple factors that ultimately contributes, you know, to an employee's happiness. So we touched on the pandemic. We talked about it, and it's important to acknowledge that the pandemic was one of many challenges that employees dealt with in the last 18 months. Obviously, we talked about that this marks 1 year since the murder of George Floyd. There has been a huge social justice movement. We're now seeing increased violence against the Asian American communities. So how can communities support people? How can companies rather help support people of color in the workforce? What about rank and file employees who want to be advocates and allies? How can they get involved to make sure their colleagues are okay and really support their well-being? So yeah, why don't we go ahead and start with Ariel?
That's a great question. And And I think intersectionality goes back to what I was saying about treating people like individuals. You know, I like the term, Marina, what you said, cog in a wheel, right? We're not cogs in a wheel. We're not just a number. We are people. And allowing for us to express that. I think one, it starts with awareness. I think, you know, that really is the foundation. What is the stigma? What is the culture? Something, for example, is men. Men pretty much, I feel unanimously across cultures, are not allowed to show emotions. That is weakness. And then for women as well, some emotions feel like it's a weakness to display. So having that awareness of, okay, what are these biases? What are the stigmas associated behind some of these? And then allowing an opportunity for people to have the awareness of why we aren't or are acting a certain way, then brings us into an opportunity to create change. And really the change comes to listening authentically. I don't think, and I love the Microsteps, I'm all about thriving mind, and I totally dig what you all do there at Thrive, because it really is, it's like we think of these changes as like humanitarian, huge mass efforts. It's like, no, let's just take a small change to listen to understand rather than listen to respond. Because coming from a consulting world, we are all about solutioning, fixing, having the answers. So taking a step back and just holding space and saying, I'm so sorry, or I hear you, how can I help? And allowing that space is huge. So being able to speak up for your needs is important. And I can speak, I'm Jewish, and hearing what's going on in Gaza right now, it's hard. It's really, really, it's hard. And I have to take a step back sometimes. And even just at the beginning of a call, you know, I do my best not to look at my phone or get the news influx, but you're like, there was a bombing. And then I get on a call and I apologize almost up front. And I say, look, if you hear my voice is a little depleted, I just want to let you know I'm struggling a little bit today. It has nothing to do, not a reflection on you all. And just allowing that opportunity to say like, hey, I'm just really struggling today, goes a long way. So there's, sorry, Dan, I could talk about this for hours, because intersectionality, I mean, absolutely in this last year, there are specific demographics struggling. I mean, our young generation who missed out on a graduation, living in their parents' basement, starting their first big kid job and haven't met any of their colleagues in person yet, they're struggling. And then you add the demographic on top of that of our Black Americans. I mean, Sabrina, like, I know you have already given some insight and have more insight to give on this, but I can't relate to that. I can hold space and empathize as deeply as I'm able to, but truly I cannot understand. So for me to just open up an opportunity to listen and say, what can I do? Is it just hold space for you, or are there actions I can be taking?
Yeah, and Ariel, thank you so much for sharing. You know, what's going on in the news cycle right now, particularly in Gaza, and how that directly impacts, you know, your own well-being. I have, you know, much like you expressed that you don't have familiarity and lens for Sabrina, I don't have a lens for Sabrina and yourself, because I am not Jewish. And that's why there's a very, very important difference between empathy and familiarization. I don't have any familiarization because I can't possibly walk from that lens. It hasn't been my upbringing, my conditioning, my lens. So yeah, I think that's also an enormously important way that those around you who do not necessarily share your lens or your demographics or other things that are essential to your identity can help. It can start from empathy. So yeah, I very much thank you for sharing your insight there. And yeah, Sabrina would also, of course, love to hear from you.
So I have a lot of thoughts on this. I think it's really important to know that everyone has a place in the social, cultural issues that we're facing right now. I'm really big about everyone knowing their role, because people that are not of color do have a certain ability to create a space and to make a seat for those who are of color, especially white Americans, for Black Americans. They have the power to create that seat. I mean, there's so many stories I hear now where companies, they're kind of skating by, they're doing their quick little DEI training and, oh, we're all great, no one's racist, let's keep it moving. And I think it's so important that, and I know Tanya was mentioning about the cultures and in the questionnaires, it's your role as an employee to find a company that has a respectable culture for your integrity and your values. Because when you work in a company that does not align with your values, there's some things you can do, but it depends on your position. If you're not in a high enough role to elicit change, it will be hard to constantly clash against your values in companies. I've seen people have nervous breakdowns and end up in psychiatric facilities because of the distress they have been brought on about when it comes to this racial issue in the workplace. It is traumatic to staff members and employees that are of color and that are not of color. And even as a company myself, I remember even delivering a retreat to a team that I work with, and racial justice was one of the chosen topics. Leadership didn't like that, and it was a whole issue that it brought about. And for me, it was traumatizing as a leader to know that, you know, the team loved it, they were excited about it, but the leadership didn't want that discussion. And so it still, we often think that this issue is a historical issue, but it's a today issue, and it appears in a more sinister way because you can't really see it. You know, people can easily say, oh, you know, and cover it, whereas back then it was a lot more overt, right? So it's a very kind of weird dynamic going on. And so one thing I love to tell my friends that are not of color is to become co-conspirators. This is a theory that I didn't come up with, but it's out there. And it's the concept of knowing that you're willing to put something on the line to help a person of color move forward in life. Historically, people of color have constantly been taken away from abilities and rights. And my grandfather, for example, oh my gosh, I love him. My parents are all teachers. I come from a teacher family. He actually could not go to school the full part of the year because he had to work on his family's farm in order to survive because of the lack in opportunities for people of color during his time growing up. And so he actually had to miss a big chunk of elementary school every single year. And it was traumatizing for him. All he wanted to do was to go to school. He even had to use the older textbooks, books of the white schools. So then he never really even got an education that was on time with what was actually happening. So his books were behind. I mean, people don't realize that that's a domino effect. It's because now that affects my family, they have one level of access, and then I'm trying to open another door of access, whereas other cultures have already had those access doors open. So I think that understanding, like I said, like Ariel said, doing the research and understanding and gaining awareness of the issue, the historical nature of the issue. And I'm speaking, of course, for the Black American population, but this is also relevant to Asian American and other populations. I think it's really crucial that the workforce makes space for it. I tell people all the time, you spend too much time at work not to have a support system, culturally, mental health wise. We spend too much time with these people for there not to be some sort of understanding, some sort of space created for that conversation. And I think it's really important to create spaces often. Don't just wait until something happens. Companies always wait until something happens, but why not create that space proactively? I'm a really big advocate for proactive mental wellness. Let's talk before you get there, right? Let's not wait to the nervous breakdown because I've already seen it. Let's get you before you get there. And I think it's so important we do that with the culture conversation, the race conversation. I'm really passionate about it because I really do believe that it starts in the culture of the core leadership of that workplace. They have to be willing to make the change. And many of them are, unfortunately, many companies, some of them are not willing to be co-conspirators, and that's okay. But the ones who are the ones who are going to progress our future.
Co-conspirators, absolutely. I look at myself as a cisgender white American male. Yeah, my demographic needs to be doing some heavy lifting because historically it hasn't been that case, and still contemporarily it hasn't been the case. And when you speak to the fact that candidates have to be seeking out companies that share these values. Look, it's added work that a candidate should not have to do because every company should be doing that. But the harsh reality is that yes, it is unfortunately added work that a candidate, if you're vested in working in a place where you can bring your full self to it, yeah, it is work that you unfortunately do have to work into your job search. And yes, is it unfair? Of course it is. I would like to mention that of some of the resources that we shared earlier, I know that we shared some of our anti-racism resources from Fairygodboss, specifically because Sabrina, you brought up the concept of co-conspirators. If you are a participant on this call and you are white and you are looking for ways to actually contribute to upending systemic racism and police brutality, if you are actually looking to do so, in our resources, there are great starting points. I believe one article is literally 115 ways for white people to get involved. So please take advantage of that if you'd like to. So I, yes, just very much encourage everybody to do that. We touched upon this a little bit, but I guess maybe let's just dive into like a little bit deeper. When looking at employer provided resources, right? It's so important in making employees feel supported and making them feel like their well-being is actually being invested in. So yeah, another thing, and not to talk up Fairygodboss too much, but like one thing that we did at the onset of this pandemic, I knew that we were all virtual. I knew that many of us were, kind of like, pent up and cooped up in our places and needed to talk to people. So we introduced free Talkspace membership. For Talkspace is a virtual therapy resources for people. We do have unlimited PTO that I'm very, very adamant about people taking advantage of, and I actually bother people to take their PTOs kind of obnoxiously so. I would love to hear some resources from all of you. I'd love to specifically from Accenture, offers that are specific to, that specifically support employees and their well-beings. And either or of you can. So.
Yeah, no, I mean, so taking a step back, I do want to acknowledge in the hierarchy of Accenture, we do have a culture of an open door policy, which means regardless of what level you're at, start a conversation. And that's a lot of where my brand, if you will, came from is, Sabrina, to your point, I knew what mattered to me and I was vocal about it. I advocated for myself and I found a company that was truly not only okay with that, but loved it. They were like, yes, you are our brand. You differentiated is what makes Accenture great. And that meant so much to me because I could come forth to leadership and say, hey, there's a problem. And in part of that, that's kind of where a lot of our resources come from. We try as best as we can to actively listen and say, what are our needs? Where are we struggling? So we have everything. We actually have Talkspace as well. We've offered free Headspace for meditation, Calm app with a Calm coach is free as well. I mean, there's a plethora, everything from included health, which partners our LGBTQ or our pride communities, we call internally, with physicians and resources that are well acquainted with their needs. I mean, it really all stems from listening. I think the mental health ally program, what we've done is we've taken the volunteers at Accenture, a lot of just the people, and we've not only required them to go through a basic awareness training, but most importantly, we make them aware of the resources available. Because you can have all the resources in the world, but if people aren't using them, if people don't know they exist, that's a problem. And that's something that I think was something we identified a few years back was we have EAP. We have all of these offerings like dependent backup care. So that's for your pet, for your kids. If you're a caregiver for your elderly parents, it's dependent backup care and all of these offers, but we don't know about them. We don't know how to access them. So one of the core goals of mental health allies is to be that conduit to care, to say, hey, well, have you tried utilizing this resource? And secondary requirement of our mental health allies is actually thriving mind. And it stems from the concept of, again, you can't pour from an empty cup. I love that or you have to put your oxygen mask on first. Whatever analogy you want to use, you need to take care of yourself in order to best show up authentically and then help others. I think that aspect of self-care, that aspect of allowing a pause, recognizing how do I react to stress? And then what can I do about it, either in the moment or proactively to prevent the long-term regeneration and resilience is so vital, whether you're taking care of just yourself or others. But most of us, just the culture of Accenture, we are givers. We give and we give and we give. But if all we're doing is giving and we're not receiving, we're not allowing ourselves to ask for help, that's a problem. So I know I kind of tangented and didn't truly answer your question. I put some stuff in there, but really it's the free therapy, the virtual therapy through Talkspace. We have EAP, which has free virtual counseling, whether it's legal advice, financial advice, which are major stressors, mental health ally program, which I am so passionate about, mostly because it's just people supporting people. And Sabrina, to a point you made, we don't want to get to people when they're in crisis. And if you just say, okay, well, go talk to the crisis counselor. Okay, but what about the people that just need someone to talk to? What about somebody that just needs somebody to relate to them and listen? And that really is the core foundation of success, I think, in our culture, and getting us to adapt and overcome, is having people show up for each other. So I would love, if I may, pass it off to Marina, because I know Thriving Mind has been a life changer for us at Accenture. So I'm sure, have you had some resources in addition to that? Do you even do that at Thrive yourself?
Yeah, we have a saying at Thrive that we drink our own champagne. We don't eat our own dog food, but we say we drink our own champagne. So we do all of our own programs and all of our own Microsteps. And yeah, absolutely. We actually just came out with our first book, Thrive did, and I'm a co-author, called Your Time to Thrive. And you'll find stories from notable people, thank you, and Thrive staffers. There's a Microstep diary in each chapter where Thrive staffer actually tries a Microstep in their own lives and talks honestly about what worked and didn't work for them. So absolutely, to your point, Ariel, like, what we need is a commitment to recharging our internal batteries on a daily basis, because being proactive about preventing burnout, and to Sabria's point, in the first place, is so much better than trying, often so unsuccessfully, to make up for it when a person is already in a state of burnout. And those principles are really at the heart of Thriving Mind, which is a mental health program Thrive Global created in partnership with Stanford Medicine. And we launched it to nearly 500,000 people at Accenture, who was our premier launch partner. So that was super exciting. But basically, like, Thriving Mind, the goal is to help us understand the different ways in which we all respond to stress and anxiety. We actually have different biotypes or brain responses to overstress. At Stanford Medicine was doing research about that we found fascinating. And we did a survey, and like 91% of Americans said that ignoring or not knowing their personal warning signs of overstress had a negative impact on their mental well-being. And people want, small everyday steps to improve their mental well-being. And that's exactly what we do. This knowledge of spotting our main stressors. So think about like the pattern of like, what is it that like constantly leads to stress for me? Our stressors are signs of overstress. So like, what do each of us do? There's different biotypes. One is rumination, where you just start thinking and thinking and thinking about the same thing, or a negative interaction over and over again. My personal biotype is anxious avoidance. When I get super overstressed, you too, Ariel? Okay. I kind of like want to go under the covers and not come out, which, we can't do, but knowing that and knowing when I'm starting to feel that way actually helps me take the steps, or the micro steps, these small steps that we can take, the 60-second breaks throughout the day. Or, another micro step I love is every day set an end to your workday. Especially now, like a lot of us are working from home. There's this boundaryless idea of perma work, but like, it doesn't have to be the same time every day, but say like, I'm actually do the thing of like closing my laptop shut as a symbolic gesture that like, I am done working right now for the day. And just that little step actually frees me up to recharge at night, so I'm not super stressed out in the morning. So yeah, I think a lot of it is knowing what our signs are, knowing what our stressors are, and then like, I think Sabrina had a great term for it, but like an arsenal of small steps you can take when you're starting to feel that overstress coming on is so empowering to know that it's like, if you start to feel like you're drowning, there are little steps you can do. There are things you can do. You can take do the 60-second box breathing. Navy SEALs do this, and I've actually been doing it on the call at different points. I don't know if you could tell, but you breathe in for 4, hold for 4, breathe out for 4, hold, and repeat. And it actually increases focus and reduces stress. And you can do it even on meetings sometimes. So yeah, it's really like providing these resources. And to Ariel's great point, letting people know what's available so they don't have to go searching and do that work, and not put the onus on your people to find these resources. Another last thing I'll mention that we do at Thrive is Thrive Time. So that is not just regular PTO, but after a sprint, or after you've met a really tough deadline, or a couple, late nights of work, take time off immediately. Like say, I'm taking a half day, or I'm taking a day, or I'm taking a long weekend. It's not a reward, it's a responsibility to yourself and to your team to go recharge, and we're all very open about that. And I think like leaders showing that, like, hello, I'm taking time off, I am unplugging, and you should too, is so important.
Yeah. And for myself personally, as somebody who battles anxiety, breathing exercises, I really didn't get into them until like the last few years, but they help. They really, really do. Thank you so much. So in full disclosure, everybody, we have more questions that we would love to get to, but I also want to be respectful of the time that we have, which is about 6 minutes left. And I want to make sure to open it up to a Q&A to hear from everybody attending. So what I'm going to do is we have some questions. Panelists, I'm going to read the question to you all. Would love to hear. Anybody can just kind of jump in, unmute yourselves and go ahead and give your insights. But one question that I want to address from Nancy. I have been out of the workforce due to mental health issues. I would like to transition back in, but I'm not sure how to find the right employer and how much to disclose. Any thoughts or advice? Yeah,
I take this one because I'm late. So first off, know your rights, because it's none of their business, to be completely frank. If you want to share, if you feel comfortable sharing, that's a different story. But at the core of it, I mean, think of it, no wish this on anyone, but think you have cancer, right? You wouldn't come back to a workplace and be like, well, I'm out of, like, I just finished my cancer treatments and I'm ready. Like, if you want to share that, you can, but does that really impact your ability to do the job? So think about that. And if you do have to disclose something, so for example, for me, I have therapy every Tuesday, actually later today. So again, all I have to say is something along the lines of, I have a doctor's appointment every Tuesday. Will this be a problem if I take an extra hour off? I can make up my time during the week, or, do I need to look to reschedule? These are conversations I have with my supervisor, nothing I brought up when I was interviewing. So just keep that in mind, focus in on what your needs are and how you can address them. And if it's truly relevant, to speak about it in the interview, or once you get your foot in and then reiterating it to your supervisor. In terms of asking and finding what the culture is, I always love the concept of you're interviewing the company as much as they're interviewing you. So ask them. I mean, ask them, like I just asked Marina, like, what do you do at Thrive that really fosters your mental health? Or, how does the company foster individualization? When, the murder of George Floyd happened, what did your company do to address it? Ask these questions. And if they come back and they're like, I don't really know, and they don't have an answer, or it just doesn't feel right, trust that gut instinct. But don't be afraid to ask. Hey, how does your company feel about mental health days? Have you ever taken a mental health day? And if they're uncomfortable answering, make that mental note, because it might not be the fit for you.
Yeah. You can tell a lot by an employer based on how they react, and not just to their answer, but yeah, like from what you can tell from their body language, what you can tell from their thought processes. Is this something that they ever even occurred to them to like initiate into their culture? If you're sensing red flags there, yeah, there's a potential that it might not be the most welcoming environment to accommodate your needs, and really the needs of anybody. Because yeah, mental health is not just for those of us who have, say, anything that is diagnosed. Everybody needs to invest in their mental health. I think we have time for one more question. I know we are right up against it, but let me share this one from Tanya. How can we move past having to explain why we need boundaries? It's often challenging for employees without the usual reasons for boundaries. Example, no kids or family obligations. Anybody want to share some insight into that, how we can move past having to explain why we need boundaries?
I can absolutely answer that because I relate with you, Tanya. I mean, everybody thinks you're available because you don't have kids. and to me, that's a very problematic mindset for society to have, right? And so one thing I want to tell you, Tanya, that I always tell people is when you learn to respect your time, others can better respect your time. And you can better respect the time of others. No one is going to respect your time like you are. No one is going to care about your boundaries like you are. And that's just the honest truth. And I think that as people, we allow people to create our boundaries for us. And that is the problem. We allow other people to decide how available we should be in whatever capacity that looks like. And so I think it's really important that you don't have to tell them, you don't even have to always have an excuse for your boundary. As people, we also think we have to have a reason for our boundary. No, maybe it's that you just have a personal obligation. That is what you have to say. That is the time you need off because you have a personal obligation. And I feel like we create excuses and we create these narratives in our head sometimes that don't even exist. Sometimes we believe that someone's going to have a problem with us having a boundary when literally they would have been just fine. And so I think it's really important we also be careful not to create a narrative of where it can go in your head. And then you have this whole thing, and then it's really they were like, oh, you could take the time off and you would have been fine. So sometimes it's just better to own the fact that you have this boundary. You may have to take this time off. Don't feel like you have to give a reason. And if it is a reason, let it be a general reason, because you have to put yourself first when it all comes down to it. And if you have the right employer, they will understand because they know you're doing a great job and that you're working hard in between. And so they know that you're not abusing that.
Yeah, that internal narrative. I'm totally somebody who does that. One thing that I like to do is that when I do find myself struggling with that internal narrative, I like to say it out loud, like literally, even if I'm alone. And somehow usually it sounds a little bit more inviting and a little bit more reasonable than what the internal dialogue that's actually happening. So yeah, love that suggestion. Okay, we are exactly at 1 o'clock. Panelists, I want to thank each and every one of you. I felt very comfortable and safe in this environment. So I just want to thank the three of you for really making it that way for me. I'm sure that we had many participants who hopefully felt the same way. To our participants, I want to thank all of you as well. Really, really great questions. And yeah, thank you, everyone. And treat yourselves well. And yeah, everybody have a great day.